Hi besties, welcome back to my channel, or hi, my name is Stacy if you're new here. So today's video is super exciting because I'm reviewing the new Pat McGrath Divine Blush Duos. They're so beautiful. I bought every color in the range because I just could not be contained when it comes to the Pat McGrath blushes. If you've been following my channel, you know that the Pat McGrath Divine Blush is one of my favorite powder blushes of all time. The formula is just immaculate. So when I saw that she was coming out with these duos, I knew I had to pick up all of them, even though some of them are definitely meant for deeper skin tones, which we'll get into. But yeah, so if you want to see me apply all the blushes to my face and also some hand swatches and comparisons to her older blushes, then just keep on watching because all of that will be in this video. And then I'll kind of wrap up my thoughts at the end with some recommendations for who I think would like these blushes and also just my review on this blush line in general. So if that sounds good to you, then just keep on watching. But before we get into it, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you want to see more content like this because it really helps out my channel and it would really mean a lot to me. And let's just get right into the video. Okay, so first up we have Aphrodite Amour. So I'm going to read Pat McGrath's description of the shades because I feel like they're pretty accurate and descriptive. So the rays are a pink demi-matte, the roses are a cool pink satin pearl, and blended together they make a soft pink satin pearl. This shade I really like. It's definitely a warmer pink and it's also on the lighter side. I think this shade was intended for fair to light skin tones. Out of all the 6 new shades, it's definitely the lightest and the least saturated in pigment. So for me, this one was the most easy to build up and it was the most blendable simply because it's just a lighter shade, so it's easier to work with on my fair skin tone. Okay, next up we have the shade Venusian Sunrise. The rays are described as a lavender demi-matte, the roses are a pink demi-matte, and blended together they make a cool pink demi-matte. So this one is the second lightest shade in the collection. I found this one also pretty easy to build up and it's also very nice and blendable. For me, the lavender shade actually ends up being a lot more pink than a lot of other purple blushes I own. Generally speaking, purple blush does blend out to a cool pink. That's why purple blush is usually flattering. It doesn't end up looking actually purple on your cheeks, but I do have to say the lavender was not giving that much lavender when I applied it. The description of this blush being a cool pink is pretty accurate. And it's actually not a super cool pink either. I thought that the lavender would definitely cool it down a lot more. I initially thought this would be my favorite blush, and it is my favorite blush out of this collection, but it's just not as lavender or cool leaning as I initially thought. Oh yeah, also I think this would do best on fair to medium skin tones. It is a little bit more saturated than the Aphrodite Amour shade. Okay, the next blush we have is Divine Rose 2. The rays are described as a soft rose demi-matte. The roses are described as a vivid pink satin pearl, and combined it makes a coral rose with satin pearl. This blush on me turns more of a rosy pink, and it's also quite saturated rosy pink shade. It's definitely a lot brighter than the original Divine Rose, which you'll see in the comparisons. So I actually think that this blush would do a lot better on medium to deeper skin tones. It's a lot more saturated of a pink shade. I think on deeper skin tones it would look more like a nudie pink, and on medium skin tones it's more of that brighter pink that I think people would really like in the spring and summer. I can definitely still wear this shade on my fair skin tone, but it is a little bit brighter than my usual preference, and I do have to be a little bit more careful with this than the first 2 blushes I talked about. So next up we have Cosmic Coral. The rays are described as a soft sienna demi-matte. The roses are described as a cool pink coral demi-matte, and blended together they make a bronzed peach demi-matte. On my skin tone, Cosmic Coral and Divine Rose look very, very similar. This Cosmic Coral shade definitely leans a lot more pink on the cheeks than it seemed in the pan. I would just say that the Cosmic Coral one is slightly warmer, especially because it has that more sienna shade in it compared to the Divine Rose 2, which is a cooler pink. But yeah, on my fair skin tone, because they're both like saturated pinks, they kind of end up looking pretty similar. Again, I think this shade would look great on medium to deeper skin tones. It would look more like a warmer pink on medium skin tones and probably like a nudier peach shade on deep skin tones. Next up we have the shade Paradise Glow. So according to a Pat McGrath comment on her Instagram, she said that this is the only not new blush. So this blush combines Paradise Venus with Desert Orchid, which are 2 blushes that came out in the original blush collection. So the rays are described as a golden bronze satin pearl, which is Desert Orchid, and the roses are described as a terracotta demi-matte, which is Paradise Venus. And blended together, they make a bronze sienna satin pearl. So I actually really like this shade. It looks quite deep in the pan, but actually the colors are more on the desaturated side. They're more nudie in tone. If you already own these blushes like I do, you definitely don't have to pick them up. I just picked it up because it's super pretty and for the sake of this review. I actually think this might be one of the most versatile blushes because even with my fair skin tone, I didn't have to be super careful about building up the pigment and looking like a clown since the tone is much more muted, which makes sense because the colors are coming from her original collection, which all of the colors in those are generally speaking more nude and muted. This one gives a nice bronzy sun-kissed blush to my fair skin. I think it looks really great for summer. Also, if you don't own either of the blushes, I think this is a great bang for your buck, so you get 2 in 1. So yeah, I actually think that this would look good on fair to deep skin tones. It might just be a very nudie blush on deep skin tones. This is that perfect like sunburned, sun-kissed blush. And then lastly, we have the shade Night Bloom. So the rays are described as a pink violet demi-matte. The roses are described as a red demi-matte, and blended together they make a magenta demi matte. The first thing I noticed when I was putting this blush on my cheeks was that it's actually a lot more cool tone than I thought it would be, especially the red, because in the pan the red looks like a warm toned red, but when you blend it out on the cheeks and when you blend out the swatch, it turns a cool toned red, like a cherry red. And actually the more you blend it out, the more of that purple base shines through, and then combined with the pink violet demi matte in the rays, it just makes this blush overall a very cool toned red type of blush. So I actually think this is very, very unique. Clearly it was intended for deeper skin tones. I actually think this would be beautiful on deep skin tones. I like that it has that berry undertone, but I think it would just look like a more saturated pink on a deep skin tone. Even medium skin tones might like this, but it would be a pretty bright pinky berry shade. And on my fair skin tone, I did find this one the hardest to blend. I literally had to tap my brush once and it covered my entire cheek. So this one is definitely the most pigmented out of all 6 of the blushes, and honestly out of the whole line in general. Okay, so now we're gonna move on into the comparisons between these newer blushes and some of Pat McGrath's older blushes. So now I'll just move into the swatch comparisons.
Flirtatious seems similar to the shade of the roses, but the roses are a bit more pink, whereas Flirtatious is still more beige and muted in comparison. Nude Venus also seems kind of similar, but there's definitely a stronger orange peachy undertone. Nymphette I would say is the most similar, but there's a stronger gold pearl running through it, and it's still a little bit more muted in tone compared to Aphrodite Amour. It's not very similar to Divine Rose. I just compared them because they're both kind of purpley blushes, but Divine Rose is a lot more grayish mauve, whereas Venusian Sunrise is like a brighter lilac pink. Again, comparing to Nymphette, Venusian Sunrise is a lot cooler in tone and also slightly more saturated. Compared to Cherish, it's still cooler and it's actually not as bright as Cherish is. Comparing Divine Rose 2 and Divine Rose 1, you can clearly see that Divine Rose 2 is a lot more saturated. It's basically as if you turned Divine Rose 1 up a notch. It doesn't have as much gray or mauve in it. It looks pretty similar to Cherish in the pan, but it has a little bit more depth to it, and it doesn't have that cool tone Barbie pink quality that Cherish has. It's actually pretty similar in tone to Nymphette, but as you can see, it's deeper and more saturated. Cosmic Coral is kind of like, again, a more saturated version of Nude Venus. There's also a little bit more red in the shade. It's definitely a lot warmer than Cherish, but their brightness and saturation is about the same. Compared to Desert Orchid, once again, there's a lot more saturation here, and also there's a lot more red, especially in the Sienna shade. Desert Orchid has more of a yellow undertone. Even though Desert Orchid is supposedly the same shade as the Rays, I actually find them to be a little bit different. The Paradise Glow one has a little bit more red to it, whereas the Desert Orchid has more gold yellow undertone. I don't really think that the subtle difference would translate onto the cheeks, but it's just something to keep in mind. Paradise Venus also seems to be the teensiest bit less red compared to the roses in Paradise Glow, but honestly, again, the difference is not going to be noticeable. Night Bloom is the most similar to Lovestruck in terms of tone, but it's just a lot more pigmented and vibrant on the cheeks. I also don't own Electric Bloom to compare it to, but judging from pictures I've seen, Electric Bloom is a lot warmer, whereas Night Bloom definitely pulls cool. I also only threw Paradise Venus in here because it was one of the deepest shades, but it's definitely not similar.
So now that you've seen all the swatches, try-ons, and comparisons, I want to just wrap up my final thoughts about this collection. So first of all, I think Pat McGrath did a really good job of creating new shades, except for the Paradise Glow shade, which is the only repeat. But within the new shades that she did create, they're all pretty distinct from the original blushes that she created. So if I were to kind of describe a theme of this new collection, it's definitely brighter, more saturated, more ready for spring and summer, and also generally geared towards medium to deeper skin tones, just simply because of that extra saturation in these colors, compared to the original blush line, which if I had to describe it in one word as a theme, it would be more nude. So basically these blush duos are kind of like the original ones, but turned up a notch in terms of color and saturation. My personal 2 favorite blushes from this line are Aphrodite Amour and Venusian Sunrise. The main reason is just because these are geared towards lighter skin tones. If you prefer a lighter tone pinky blush, you would like these. Aphrodite Amour is slightly warmer, Venusian Sunrise is slightly cooler, so that would be the difference. But also Aphrodite Amour is the most nude. Venusian Sunrise is slightly more saturated. But another blush out of this line that I think still works for fair skin tones is Paradise Glow. But that makes sense because this is taking 2 shades from the original lineup. As I said before, the original lineup is more nude, so it makes sense that this nudier, more muted blush would still work on fair skin tones. It would just look more like a sunburn. And then for medium skin tones, I would still recommend this Paradise Glow shade. Again, as I said, it's very versatile. I think it's a great nudie terracotta blush on medium skin tones. And then I also recommend these these two, Divine Rose 2 and Cosmic Coral. Divine Rose 2 is just a slightly cooler pink, and Cosmic Coral is a slightly warmer pink. So you can choose based on your undertones or your preferences. It'll be a little bit more of a pinky shade, so I think it would be great for spring and summer, but it wouldn't be as hard to work with as it is on my fair to light skin tone. I think if you have a fair to light skin tone like me and you like really bright blushes, then you might also like these. But generally speaking, when you're working with such pigmented blushes, it is going to be a little bit more difficult than the New Year shades. So that's why I don't necessarily recommend these for light skin tones, but if you like that bright blushy look, you might still be into these. And then lastly, for deep skin tones, my recommendation is Night Bloom. Again, this is like a really pretty fuchsia pink color. I think on deep skin tones, it will look more like just like a cool pink. But on my skin tone, it's very, very bright and I have to be really careful with the amount I apply. Honestly, I don't really recommend this for if you have a light skin tone. It's just pretty hard to work with, just given the saturation. There's nothing inherently wrong with the formula itself, but it's just because it's so pigmented, it's going to be really hard to blend out if you have a fair skin tone. I think if you have a medium skin tone and you like super bright blushes, you might also like this, but generally speaking, because it's so pigmented, I feel like I would only recommend this to deeper skin tones. But I also think that, again, deeper skin tones would like these two pinky blushes, the Cosmic Coral and Divine Rose, but these would look more like nudie pinks, I believe, on deeper skin tones, like not as bright of a pop as the Night Bloom shade. And I think also Paradise Glow might be really nice on deep skin tones, but this might end up being too nude if you have like a very deep skin tone. Like I can see this just kind of like blending into your skin tone if you're quite deep, and also if you're warm tone, I feel like. So that's kind of why I'm recommending each type of blush for each category of skin tone. But you guys can let me know down in the comments below if you tried these and what your skin tone is and whether or not you think it suits you. As for the formula, this is the same immaculate powder blush formula that we know from the original Divine Blush collection. I've raved about Pat McGrath's Divine Blushes ever since they came out. One of my top favorite powder formulas. Basically, they're just super creamy on the skin. They don't give that powdery look that a lot of powder blushes can give. They never look heavy or cakey. They also have the amazing blurring quality that you would want from a powder. And she has two formulas, which in these duos are kind of mixed together. She has the demi matte and the pearl finish. The demi matte does kind of add some sheen to your cheeks in a more satin way, whereas the pearl definitely adds some more shimmer, but it's not any detectable shimmer. Like if you looked up close to your cheek, you wouldn't be able to see any like shimmery particles or sparkles. It just looks like a very, very nice glow. So yeah, I love both of the formulas. I think the way that they're mixed in these duos is great. I think the duos are a great bang for your buck because you're essentially getting 3 blushes in one. The only thing is you have to make sure you like the shades that you're getting, which, as I kind of mentioned before, these shades are pretty different compared to the original line, which is good because that means that there's not really any redundancy here, but also it means that if you really like the original shades, you might not necessarily like these shades. Like for me personally, I like the original shades better, but that's just because I generally speaking like more muted blushes, and because I have a fair skin tone, more nudie blushes will show up slightly brighter on me anyways, whereas bright blushes might easily look too much. But if you have a deeper skin tone, you might have the opposite problem, so that's just something to always keep in mind. These blushes last the whole day on me, and I've never had any problem with the longevity. I love that even as a powder, they don't take away all the glow from your skin, and if you're getting a pearly blush, it's definitely adding some glow. But I feel like even with the demi matte blush, it adds a little bit of glow, but it doesn't emphasize pores, doesn't emphasize texture. It's honestly just one of the most perfect blush formulas in my opinion. So I think that's about all my thoughts for today. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you liked this video, and comment and subscribe down below if you want to see more content like this, because it really helps out my channel and it would really mean a lot to me. And I'll see you all in my next video. Bye.